So I believe we are live right now. Hi, everybody out there. My name is John Paul Rhinemiller. I am an associate animation director at Blizzard, working on the Diablo franchise. And I'll be your moderator today. We have a great panel for you today to talk about cinematics in game. And we have members on the panel today from the Society for Cinematics in Game. And the panel itself is called Why Cinematics. So I'd like to at least first start with a video from Society for Game Cinematics website that does a little bit of intro to what the society is, who some of the members are, and then we'll get into meeting the panelists. So I'm going to switch it over there, and I'm going to play.
You know, I'm very lucky to work with so many incredibly talented people at my studio. But what started to happen recently
is that I've met people outside my organization who do exactly what I do every single day. People who work on games like
Fortnite,
Gears of War,
Overwatch,
The Last of Us,
Destiny 2,
God of War,
World of Warcraft,
Infinity Blade,
Hearthstone,
Tiny Tina's Wonderlands,
Diablo,
Uncharted 4,
Star Wars Jedi,
Battlefield 2.
We found ourselves having interesting conversations on how each one of us led a team to create cinematic content within a game. And we found that we all did it differently.
We had a lot of conversations about how we work and what our methods and philosophies are. And we realized that game cinematics, they need a platform for these discussions.
There's groups for animation, the film industry, game development, even festivals showcasing their work, but nothing specific to game cinematics.
The really cool thing about the cinematic arts is that it requires collaboration with almost every department within a game studio.
It is not quite traditional movies, but it's not quite interactive gameplay either. It's somewhere between. So it creates very unique challenges you haven't seen before.
A lot of our early planning discussions actually felt like they could be full-on panel discussions. It was really inspiring and energizing to actually be able to engage with others from around the industry who really understood the work that goes into cinematics.
And so we've decided to create the Society for Game Cinematics.
The SGC is a place for us to learn, share, and grow. A place for us to advance the field of game cinematics together.
It's for industry veterans who have had a hand in shaping the legacy and history of cinematics.
The SGC is also for students, those that want to learn more about the craft.
If you make game cinematics, there's a place here for you.
A common thread among the founders is that we all came from a lot of different backgrounds, but we still somehow managed to find our way into cinematics.
All the founding members have experience in game cinematics in some form, whether it's on the animation side, engineering, directing, or any other discipline.
We want to kick it off with an online community on social media.
We'll also be hosting panels and talks with top-tier experts.
We also have mentorship and partnership opportunities for those entering the industry.
And we hope that one day this will all be so much more.
To get involved, you just need an interest and a passion to learn and share ideas and actively engage with the group.
The best people in this industry get together and they talk about how things can be better.
Come join the conversation.
Come join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Help us frame the visual narrative at societyforgamecinematics.com.
Thank you guys for joining us. I'd like to let the panelists just do a quick intro of themselves. Greg, if you'd like to start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Mitchell. I'm the Director of Cinematic Storytelling at Reactor.
Great.
And I'll pass it on to Marianne.
All right.
Hi, I'm Marianne Hayden. I'm the lead cinematics animator at Skydance New Media. Emily?
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Sue. I'm the line producer at Netflix Animation, but formerly was at Blizzard in the story and franchise development team working on cinematics on all franchises.
So as you can tell, a ton of knowledge from the industry, working with narrative, working with cinematics in many different ways and many different storytelling opportunities. So we'd like to discuss a number of topics related to cinematics and games today. We'll as well be taking questions from all of you out there, so feel free to drop them in the stream, and I'll try to kind of keep up with those as we go along. But we're going to get it kicked off right away. So we saw the video. You guys have a website. Why the creation of the organization? Why do you guys feel that it was necessary for cinematic content that spans across different mediums and pipelines?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'll kick it off to Greg and Marianne. If anybody is in the live audience on site, you'll see someone there who is also in the video named Brian Horn. I'm gonna shame him right out the gate. So when we're wrapped here, you can all huddle around him and ask for more information. And Brian and I work together at Blizzard. He's still there as the cinematic director supervisor. And he started bringing in like guest directors or guest speakers for all the directors there, and just started sharing ideas and information. And I think that really started to spark something in these conversations where like basically nobody was doing anything the same, and like pipelines were totally different, and the even titles and the things that we call people are different from studio to studio, and like how. And it was just really interesting to approach something like cinematics in that way, because every game is different and every studio does it so differently. And there were just a lot more conversations that sparked from there that started to pull in more people. And we're like, why don't we have a forum for this? Why don't we have a group for this? And even at that time, we were trying to put cinematics up for awards. And we were kind of constantly getting roadblocked of like, well, that doesn't really quite fit into this category or that category or any category. We didn't really live within film or animation or games, and we were in this like very like niche bucket off to the side that we really started to think about like, oh, okay, there is a place here somewhere in the world for us, and we just have to create it. And so, from there, Brian had a few conversations with a few other people. He brought me into it, and then we brought in a few other people, and that started sort of the momentum of this. And then last summer, we kicked off very casually just to see who else was out there.
And did the formation of it happen over pandemic?
Yeah. So
okay,
we actually,
great.
A lot of the founders, we haven't even met in real life yet. Greg and I met for the first time at SIGGRAPH in Vancouver back in August.
Yeah.
Great.
And it was kind of a pandemic effort, to make this happen. I was one of the directors that Brian had brought in to come and speak to the team over. And then also I knew Dory because I had helped arrange some talks with the Real Time Society for the Real Time Conference, and they started talking to me saying, hey, we're looking at trying to form this group. How would you feel about being a part of this? I said, yeah, that's great. And for a lot of the reasons that Emily already mentioned was the fact that, we all seem to kind of know each other from either working together or meeting like at GDC or some other type of events. We know there's these people out there who work in cinematics. We've never actually had this collective to be able to come together and discuss our craft specifically. And same thing goes for awards. Been lucky to work on teams where we've had content up for Annie Awards and for the VES Awards. But then where can we have this channel or this place to actually showcase all the great work that's being done that's considered to be cinematics, cutscene, any type of linear style storytelling that you're seeing in games. And of course, it's not even linear that much anymore. So yeah, it was, and all this kind of like started gaining momentum through 2020 and 2021. And as I said, we then had this soft launch that then moved forward, and here we are.
Great. And I think you guys are onto something, because it has been missing for quite some time in this industry. And I think anybody that's worked in cinematics for quite a while, can gravitate towards that idea of people coming together, like-minded people coming together to discuss all the different things and approaches to making cinematics. Because you go to another studio, it is very different. And so, Marianne, maybe if you could start with, the role of cinematics in games has changed a lot, right? Over your time in this industry, over my time. And so, and each studio does approach it. So how do you see, what do you see the role of cinematics now, out there in studios, or maybe just from your experience?
Right. Yeah. So actually, when I joined this group, I was still at Naughty Dog, and I had shipped everything, all the Uncharted games, and The Last of Us, and I left about a year ago, and now I'm at a new studio, and we're a bunch of people coming from all over the industry with different experiences and trying to form our own pipelines now. And we all are bringing our own experiences to the table. So it's really, really interesting to see how different things work at other studios and what their approaches are for cinematics. And the definition of cinematics is also changing like all the time. Like everybody here on this panel has probably had a different definition of what a cinematic is, right? Does it involve any kind of player input, or is it completely absent? I don't, like that's depends on who you talk to. So yeah, it's and I'm having the opportunity now to be on a team that is like taking all of like the best parts of a pipeline and trying to move them forward and make a new pipeline, and doing something new that we're doing at our studio. So it's like, I think in any time you make a game, there's always a little bit of trial and error. And even if you've got like all of these legacy issues or non-issues of like things that do work, you want to build on those things. And it's always constantly evolving, basically.
Do you find like going to a new studio, those challenges are similar, or like if you're building something from the beginning, do you have an idea of how you want to build it based off of your past experience, or what you want to accomplish like for the future?
Oh, sure. Yeah, all of that. And everybody on the team does, because we all know what has worked in the past and we know what maybe wasn't working as well in the past. And so coming, bring all those to the table, is helping us, move forward by like hopefully not making some of those same mistakes. But then as we're like moving forward in our production, we're seeing like, oh, like some of these things are kind of inherent in like any production.
And Emily, Greg, any differences for you in that role currently, or different types of viewpoints there?
Well, one thing I think I'd like to add about the fact of going from one studio to the next, I think the biggest hurdle that I've seen a lot of people cross in the past 2 to 3 years or 4 years has been the transition from pre-rendered cinematics to real time. After working at Epic, pretty much all the scenes that we did were always real time. The only time they were pre-rendered is when we just couldn't accomplish something on an Xbox 360. We had to pre-render the content, but it was always real time. And then when I made my way to the Coalition, continuing with Gears of War, they had an entire cinematics team set up basically to do pre-rendered work and then just placed into the game. So when they wanted to make the transition then to taking that team that was all formed in doing pre-rendered work, that was scary. That was scary because the team then had to kind of learn these new workflows and how to work in real time. And there was concern about, hey, can we get the quality level that we got previously in pre-rendered content? Well, yeah, I mean, games are pushing 4K 60 frames a second now. We have to get there. The entire game is there. We can't worry so much about whether the cinematics alone look good. The entire game has to look good. And so that kind of transition is important because that's not just a team transition, that's a studio transition. The entire studio has to get on board understanding that you have seamless cinematics coming in and out of gameplay, and you're using the same maps, you're using the same levels, you're sharing the same space, and you have to actually go in together solving these problems. So workflows like that from studio to studio do make a big difference, and actually across, I think, different genres of gameplay as well.
And Emily, for you in production, like you're seeing it from the ground up every time. Either you move to a new studio, maybe you start a new project and they want to bring new features on. Like, how does that impact what you do on a day to day?
Depends, as always.
Yeah.
How ambitious any kind of vision is and what the timelines are.
Right.
Definitely coming from a linear long form background. Very different when you move into a game space. And the role of cinematics, right, ultimately is to function within a way that supports the game. Right. And whether that's, you know, inside or outside of the game. If we're kind of forwarding a narrative or we're trying to tell a story or create an emotional connection that players can engage with. And so the timelines, I think, can vary greatly and wildly between what the expectations are of game development versus like creating cinematics and needing to marry those two things together, especially if the cinematic storytelling has to live within the game. So it definitely depends. I think it definitely depends on what kind of game, how ambitious is the storytelling, what is the timeline, where are all those pieces coming in and fitting. And you know, when you're trying to push new technology, there's always things that you're going to have to account for that will break a little bit.
And have you guys been in a position where because of the type of story that you're telling, maybe because of you're starting at a new studio or shipping, like you're having to bring resources and talent in, like new talent in, and help kind of grow the team that way? Is it do you find challenges on that side of it as well from a resource perspective, especially if the story grows, the franchise grows? You have to adjust with those, not only to a project timeline, but also from a resource standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, being that you bring in talent in who know how to make linear content, and when you're putting all this stuff into a game engine, you're then wanting people who can actually work with that content in a game engine versus working in Maya or some other program they're used to doing animation or some type of editing in, like in Premiere. So it's important to know that you're going to be looking for different types of talent or talent who have the ability to work in both. You know, because traditionally cinematics are linear, but the fact that we're working now in real-time game engines and they're a lot more integrated into the games and all. For a while there, like I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, when we were doing stuff, making the move to real time, it felt like we were trying to find unicorns for people who could actually do both, and that was difficult. And so there came to a point where we had to kind of compartmentalize. Okay, this part of the team is going to work in this software, and this team is going to help with the integration. So, you know, it is difficult finding those teams and those crews, but I think a lot of that's starting to slowly evolve and change at this point.
Well, I totally agree. I've had definitely similar experiences. Because a lot of times, like the best animators are coming from film, and those people don't necessarily have the experience working with the game engine, or maybe the desire to want to learn how to implement their cinematic into a game. And so it is finding that unicorn that like kind of has that thirst for technology, but as well as the precision of making a cinematic really come together. So it's you're dead on, Greg. It's definitely finding a unicorn.
And there's some studios who've been around a lot. Like if they're lucky, they've been around a really long time. So there's just like this homegrown innate knowledge that is like passed on from like decade to decade. And it's like, how do you gather that information while also, you know, making room for all this new technology or like upcoming game engines and like everybody kind of onboarding into a new system. So there's like that innate like history like combined with all these things that are changing within the industry.
And that's why we have the SGC. So we get all these people together talking and discussing this and sharing these ideas, these viewpoints, and these understandings of the challenges that we're having in the industry right now. I had to get a pitch in there for us.
Well, no, Greg, you're right, because I think we talk about the different studios and how they approach it, right, and how they tackle cinematics. And I think the introduction of real time does start to bring the focus into animators, technical designers, tech animators, the support system that comes around a cinematic pipeline within real time, and how that is actually changing the way that we tell stories in the game. So, you know, the thing is, like, why are cinematics still important to game development? I'd love to kind of throw that out to the panel. And everybody here, I feel, is passionate about storytelling and passionate about the medium that we make. And it has been evolving. And so, you know, why do you guys feel that it's important?
to help like finish a story and get people to really connect with the characters. It's a way to piece together a gameplay that you maybe can't do in gameplay, or advance the story to a different location, or there's so many different ways, right? Oh, I need to unload this level, we need to have a cinematic. I mean, that's one thing, right? But
Right. There's some practical reasons, right?
Yeah. But it's like, don't push the skip button. The cinematics are important too.
Well, and I think the more we get them integrated like that, the less they're going to have the opportunity to press the skip button. Or you can make friends with a designer and make sure that they can only do that after replay, right? Like, just designers are your best friends. Just get in with them and make sure that they have to watch it, right?
But the goal too of the cinematic is part of the game. It's part of the story.
Yes.
It's part of your whole entire experience. And if you want to press the skip button, then the game probably isn't doing its job, right? We want to play the game. You want to play the game and you want to watch the cinematic because you want to enjoy the entire experience. So if there's a disconnect there, then something's not working.
Yeah, I would argue that experience even starts before players have purchased the game. Because cinematics come into play there too. If we're thinking about the marketing and the teasers and the what's the hook, what's the grasp that you are using, and a lot of times cinematics is a tool that is used to, I think, entice people into connecting with something before they really know what it is, and hooking them into it. So like that whole experience starts right, like, and then being this long anticipated wait for that game and seeing the rest of the story.
And I think we also talk about cinematics being motivation. They are motivation to do what you're about to do next in the game. As much as we're advancing the story at that point, we're giving you reasons to go do what you're going to go do next. I always talk about the fact that you look back the arcade games. I was always amazed as a kid of the opening animation for Donkey Kong. He's climbing up the ladder with the girl. He's taking your girl. You've got to that isn't a cinematic in the sense that we're seeing in the cinematic presentation, but it was a bit of story. It was a bit of story helping to motivate how you're playing this game. And that's something that has just evolved over the years to where we've taken, linear storytelling, which is something we all know. It's been around for over 100 years, and integrating that into the gameplays. So for me, cinematics are an opportunity for us to grab the attention of the player, and let them know that, hey, this is important for you to watch. And I would like to think that, there's a lot of us doing this now. Yeah. I would like to think that the players and everything has evolved enough where there's like this binding trust between us and the player, that trust us that we're going to show you something good, and we're going to trust that you're not going to skip it because we are pouring our heart and soul into what we're making to make this stuff incredible. So it's an opportunity for us to grab their attention and make them pay attention to this narrative, however we decide to creatively do it.
And I think also, like, it depends on the type of game that you're making too, right? So if we're mindful of how we're telling story in the games that we're making, and we make that that opportunity for cinematics feel like it has a purpose in the flow of everything that we're doing, then that player experience at the end of the day means a lot more, right? So the better that technology gets, the more integrated that cinematics gets with the development team and with the story in the flow of the game experience itself, I think really starts to put together this complete experience. And we're evolving, and we're continuing to evolve that with technology. So it's continuously getting better each year that I obviously play some narrative filled games because that's what I love to play. I see it. I see it with my peers. I see it with other companies. Just really starting to bring that complete experience together. So I'm excited for where things are going to be going in the future, right? So a couple of questions I think we got from the chat here, the stream. Bomper Studio says, "What is the must-haves in a great game cinematic, and what is your favorite cinematic of all time?" So we'll start with favorite cinematic of all time. We can go around quick and get it if you have one off the top of your head.
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
I can't answer that.
It's so hard because I'm always inspired by the movies, and that's the stuff that reminded me of that stuff got me inspired to make the games. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so it's
Well, if we reframe that and like what right now off the top of your head is like, what is a cinematic that you can say has stuck with you? Like that you watched play or recently, like that's actually stuck with you.
oh man,
Anything come off the top of your head, guys?
I can't think of anything at the moment.
The
The pressure,
the dancing scene of Ellie and Dina in The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah.
And how that shows the relationship and, you know, a little bit of what's going to come before and after. Like, that's what
Good
I
one.
think that's at the
That's a
top
good
of my
one.
list. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Emily, anything come to mind?
Yeah, there's a couple, but I'll say the one that kind of sticks out for me, and I don't know if it's just like the trauma experience of it or or just the feeling afterward, but was the Diablo 4 announcement cinematic by Three They Come. And I did work on it, but that's not why. It is something that has stuck with me. I think it was one of those moments where you could see the possibilities of a cinematic and how far you could push, and like the reaction, and being in a BlizzCon audience, witnessing that and the reaction and the feeling and all the emotions that brings for people from a long awaited project.
Yeah.
That one in particular is like has a special place in my heart.
You know, so for me, there's actually two, and in a sense, they're not even real cinematics, but it's what really drove me into getting in this business back in 2005. And first was actually just starting Half-Life 2. You know, and that's a game that really has no cinematics, but you have these interactive experiences. And I won't forget the first time I got into the first level of that, and the fact that I'm in this battle and I'm shooting and the music is swelling and all the activities happening around me, and I had just gotten chills in playing that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm playing a movie. You know, where can I learn how to do this type of thing? You know, and that's what kind of really started drawing me into where storytelling was making a big impact for me cinematically. And like I said, that wasn't even a cinematic. But I think the thing that got me the most was actually I finally bought a PS2 in so it had been 2002. And a friend of mine said, get Gran Turismo 3. And at the time, I was working in motorsports television. So I was shooting a lot of promotional pieces, high energy. And that opening sequence came on from Gran Turismo 3 to a remix of Lenny Kravitz's Are You Going My Way? And I was blown away. And I said, wait, this is all in-game stuff. I said, somebody's doing this. Why am I doing that? Why am I going out and shooting this stuff? I need to get into this stuff because this is like where it's all going. You know, so that made a huge impact on me as in like, okay, I think there might be some way for me to get into this. And then I started cutting trailers together for a couple of different game companies. A friend of mine then got me into saying, hey, I know you play with 3D. You should be able to get into doing game cinematics. And so that's what got me with my first job at Midway in 2005. So to me, those were the two things that really impacted me the most and let me know that there was actually this other world happening where linear storytelling was starting to make a huge impact in games. So that's my two.
I love them. So go back to any thoughts on any must-haves in great game cinematics? Like any one thing that you guys can say is a must-have in great game
I
cinematics?
guess I'll go with the motto that was there, and Brian is going to be really familiar with this. Hi, Brian. Which is the memorable moments was sort of a motto, and I think between Greg and Marianne and myself, that's probably a common theme amongst the cinematics that we even just listed of like, there's something about it that sticks with you. You know, it's breaking through some sort of barrier that makes it memorable because there is a lot of content out there. There is a lot of noise nowadays, and there's a lot like that anybody can consume, but like, how is that standing out beyond amongst the noise?
Yeah, that's a good one. We got another question.
Also, I would say a reason. You know, sometimes cinematics seem to be created, you know, as Marianne said, as in that making sure we can load a level underneath. You know, but if anything, sure that there is good story content to what you're creating, and it's not just a bunch of information being dumped or information that could be actually placed somewhere in gameplay, during a walk and talk or something, instead of actually just having two people talking with no real motivation in the scenes. That's where you're gonna have people skipping it. So I think it's important to have a reason for having that cinematic there.
100%.
Yeah, completely agree. Another one from Bumper Studio was there's a worry that cinematics will disappear with them being more ingrained into the game and with real-time workflows. Is there a worry that cinematics will disappear with them being more ingrained into the game and with real-time workflows?
I don't think they'll disappear. I think they'll just be more hidden. You might not be able to tell what's gameplay and what's a cinematic after a while. And maybe that's the goal. You're playing an immersive, interactive experience that's like you're going to play a movie, you're going to play a TV show. So I don't think they'll disappear. Just their definition is going to change.
Yeah, I love that because I agree. I think the more you can integrate them with the experience, right? That's the ultimate goal. And I think our medium is very young in that sense. And how we tell story in games and integrate those in seamlessly and being able to experience something like that where you're not really sure is like, that's that sweet spot where I think a lot of people would love to get. And I think, we started to see that trend of making the technology actually cooperate a little bit more with allowing that to happen with the experience that you're trying to make, right? So
yeah, they'll definitely take a different form. So I wouldn't say they would disappear. And I think about like Dory, who's another one of our founders, and the work that he was able to do in God of War, and just like the various levels in which we can get more creative with these, because the definition of cinematics was so different, a decade ago, or the way that in which you think of cinematics or their purpose, or the way that like they're only meant to forward a narrative or get to the next level or whatever it is. But like now it's like being a part of the story is actually, I think, a more powerful way in which it is like they will emerge even more and become more important.
All right. So going back to another topic here, what are some of the differences and similarities between working on cinematics, films, and games? You all have different backgrounds and have worked across, many areas of the industry. So would love to hear some thoughts on some of the differences.
Okay, well, I'm someone who actually came from working in television. I was working in television for about 13 years before I got into games. And honestly, I wanted to be a game programmer when I was 14. I was just terrible at it. I'd hit a roadblock in BASIC because that's all I knew. But I was good at actually like making the graphics and stuff. But I went on to study television and film in college, and then I got a paying job working in motorsports television, which was great. I got to fly around, see a lot of great stuff. But I was running around with the camera on my shoulder. And I wasn't just shooting interviews. I was always framing stuff up cinematically. I was framing up close-ups on people. I was learning how a camera works. I was learning the basics of working with the lens and lighting and the aperture and where I get more or less depth of field, in a shot. At the same time, I was also cutting a lot of stuff together too. And so when I was getting recruited to say, hey, you got to look at doing game cinematics, I said, well, I don't know if I really have experience. I said, no. This was back in 2004, 2005. So you had a lot of high-end cinematics, and you had a lot of places that were doing it on their own, but usually it might be someone who's had no type of filmmaking background or learning or know-how who are putting these together. So they were breaking a lot of rules or doing very linear cameras. And they said, no, we want people like you who have this experience behind a camera and be able to cut stuff together to get in and try to integrate that into what we're doing. We're trying to make what we're doing better. So that was sort of my motivation to get in and actually get more into, into a narrative, because that's really what I wanted to do. It's just that, I went down a route that gave me paying work, and now it's getting into a route where I can actually start being more of a storyteller at that point. So over the past 17, 18 years, I've been learning that craft a lot more than I was able to put to use to it in the past 13 years before that. So honestly, all the techniques I learned from shooting and editing and putting stuff together, I use that every day. Use it every day in what I'm doing here. So that craft that I've put my time in there, I've been able to apply to what I do in game cinematics. It's really no different other than I'm just doing it digitally now.
I've noticed a big change since I entered the industry. So like I've worked in motion graphics and I worked on a feature, and the difference between feature and games is pretty big. There's you don't wear a lot of hats, or at least when I was working on the feature I worked on, I didn't wear a lot of hats, but like in games you do. Like you need to be a little bit more technical. You need to learn how to integrate things into the engine. You need to understand what it means to animate on 2s or 3s, possibly. But when I started in cinematics, when I started at Naughty Dog, that wasn't my first cinematics experience. But when I started at Naughty Dog, I was there for like 13 years. So in the beginning of those 13 years, I didn't really integrate things into the game that much. And it wasn't even asked of us. There was like a little bit, but there wasn't much work or collaboration with the design team. It was, these are your shots, polish these shots and then let's move on. And then even at Naughty Dog, that changed over the years where as cinematics became more outsourced, the internal team needed to become more responsible for the integration of scenes and working with design and environment teams and making sure that everything was going to work once it was in game. And then even like moving to Skydance, it's still like very, very similar. But I would say that cinematics and games versus like, features, there's a lot more my experience when I was on the feature was that there were a lot more producers and a lot more waiting time and downtime waiting for approvals, whereas like if you were waiting for something and you're working on a cinematic, you'd move on to another cinematic, or you'd work on something else that would like some technical problem that needed help. There's always something else to be done, where not always the case like on a feature.
That's so funny. I always thought there was more producers in games because there's so many more areas to keep track of.
Maybe those are just the studios I worked at where we're producer light, which that is changing as well. Yeah.
There was definitely a lot of producers in film for sure. Yes. Awesome.
It's interesting too. You talk about the fact of us wearing many hats in games versus like working in the film business, and that's one of the things that I think I found out. Like again, working in television, sometimes you're working with smaller crews or smaller outfits, and you did have to wear many hats. So it was interesting because when I saw friends in the film industry, they were all starting out as PAs or in areas where I feel like they weren't getting to do anything that was really creative, and so it was always hard for me to take that route. When I feel like I was actually doing a lot of things, even though I was working just in video and such. But then what's great is that when I got into the game business, I won't say that we're all ragtag or anything, but when you're working for smaller studios, you do wear many hats. So a lot of those skills that I took from what I was doing in the work I was doing at the time, I feel like it just kind of transferred over to working in games because things weren't so walled for each area of work being done. I mean, I've worked on teams that have done that as well, but it was nice to be able to kind of shift from one area to the next, learn some new techniques, and then apply some of what I'd done previously to doing that in games.
Yeah, I think for me, one huge difference, and right now I'm working on a basically feature project, and it's an interesting shift to go into a space again where you like the feature or the film or the TV show is the thing. It is the thing that is supposed to make the money, or it is the thing that is supposed to capture everybody's attention. Whereas in cinematics, you're there to just support the actual thing, and you're there to support the game, and the game is the primary focus, and you're working with these game teams. That's only in my experience. Again, every studio does it very differently. And maybe this is more of a thing for Marianne, but I think one really interesting modern day example is Last of Us, with the TV show paired with when you think about that in relation to the game, and like a lot of the concepts like Greg was saying too, is really the same, right? Like even some of the cameras and all of that is shot for shot, and you can kind of go like chicken or the egg, like did the film concepts to games,
Watching that show, there were shot for shot cinematics that I worked on that were shot for shot in the TV show. It was wild. It's like that means that the game did its job, right? Like the cinematics did its job.
Like the show is so heavily based on a lot of those moments and like the cinematics, whereas like everybody's like, where are all the infected? Because the whole gameplay was you just getting murdered over and over again. So it's like taking out those portions and really focusing in on the storytelling.
It's it's crazy how it does, like the base of the Last of Us, right? Like the story is what was really awesome about those games, and because that foundation was so strong and it made a great game, they were able to make it into a TV show very easily.
And I think the underlying, the story is, I hear a lot like gameplay is king, right? Like that's what design says, that's what gameplay says a lot. But I think when you have story in a game, this helps support, character arts and people being invested in the brand and the characters themselves, right? So when you have something that is Last of Us that has that story first focus when it comes to it, the way that it translated over to HBO was amazing. Like it was, they did it really well. So it led itself to that. But I remember playing Journey with my son when he was when he was kind of just introducing him, and there's very small, very simple cinematics in that game, but it's the environment, it's the audio, and it is the journey through that really brings that story together and makes it feel very impactful when you get towards the middle to the end and as you go along. Not a lot of audio or dialogue at all, and but still a solid base story underneath it that I think at the end really, really was powerful.
And oh my gosh, just a note on that. I was watching my son play some games recently and watching the cinematics, and he doesn't have the sound on. I'm like, that's half the cinematic. Turn the sound on.
Well, listen, I brought my nephew in when we were working on Skylanders, and he was so excited to come into the studio for the first time and like play it and like see it at my desk. And I bring him into the cinematics room with everybody in there, and he's so excited to play. And then like he boots the game up, and the first thing he says is, "How do I skip this?"
And I was saying with my son, I'm like, no. Your mom works in cinematics. You don't skip the cinematics.
Everybody was in the room. All the heads turned. I was like, oh my God, what's happening right now?
And I was about to jump in and say, well, but if they did their job right, you could actually know what was going on without.
Yes.
But I'm going to go back on that because honestly, sound plays such a huge role in everything that we do. And I'm saying that because I know sometimes sound always is the end of the chain, and they're the ones always waiting for picture lock and everything. But it's amazing how much sound makes a big difference in that. Even and Marianne, you might agree with this, is even through seamless transitions from gameplay to cinematic and back, sound is so important to make that work. Yeah.
I mean, if the sound just stops, it's like takes you out of the whole experience. Like I remember playing like Myst and Riven and growing up, and those games, I still remember the sound of like the trees blowing in the wind and the waves crashing and all of like the old like chains and like gears moving and like all of those different things, because like for me that was like my first cinematic experience playing a game, and the sound was so important.
All right, I'm going to transition over to a few more questions from the stream. Let's see. Something Beta says, what are your favorite pre-production mock-up methods?
Storyboard?
like visual or production, or I'm assuming visual.
I would assume some level of visual. So like I would assume like going through the pre-production process can look a little bit differently at many studios, right? Like the idea for me is to like get it into a state where people can essentially give you feedback, and so I'm assuming like, you know, you want to get parts of the story in there, you want to get some of the flow in there, you want to get the data into engine as quickly as possible. So do you guys have methods for that pre-production time frame? Like what are your thoughts on that? Like how do you mock stuff up?
One of my favorite things is just getting in the accent suit and shooting something immediately and getting it in the game and editing. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if the fidelity is great, but you have at least the timing. Because if you're doing previs, you know, pose to pose, timing's not always going to be there. Like you might get good framing and you might understand what your compositions are supposed to be, but it's not always the same. So for me, it's accent suit or going to the stage and shooting and experimenting that way, and then picking the selects from there and editing something together.
All right, so I'm gonna move on to another question here. Maybe you can take this one, Emily. Michael's SQU. What tech skills are you looking for in cinematics animators when you guys hire? Anybody?
We'll throw that one over to Greg.
Okay.
Oh my God. Oh, well, you know, I can animate a door and a camera. So I don't know if I'm the best to answer that question, but right now, this isn't specifically animation, but right now I feel like the people who are most in demand right now are technical artists or technical animators. Anyone who can actually have that know-how of getting into engine, using those systems, leaning on those systems, you know, to make the animation better or the experience better, or allow other people to actually do their jobs better by using the power of the game engines you're working in. That's most important. I really feel like the anyone with some type of tech art background is in high demand right now in all the industries, not just games. I mean, I know virtual production's looking for those people quite a bit because they're using game engines there. So honestly, that's the area right now that is kind of king. And I know there's technical animators out there. I'm not really sure what all their job skills are. I haven't had to hire for one now. But I would think that someone who has a lot more game engine experience than someone who's just worked in Maya or Blender.
And Marianne, when it comes to animators, like, are you looking for a little bit more technical? Have you been hiring lately?
Internally, we haven't been hiring, but we have been working with a lot of external partners, and like we want to make sure that there are technical people on those teams for sure. Technical animators, know Python. I mean, I'm like next to Greg, like I can animate a door and a camera, but like he asked me to write Python script, I'm like, I'll Google it and copy it and like change. But
there's still a place. There's still a place for those artists and animators that aren't as technical, right? Like we have technical animators for a reason, I think, on teams to help support. But we definitely still need that art and craft of animation in there too, right?
Definitely, because if you look, that's all. Again, you're looking for a unicorn, right? If someone who can script and then someone who can animate really well and polish and be excellent at facial animation, you want that whole package. Like that's really hard to find. Because if you're going to be really good at something, you can't be good at all of it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's very true. And I think one thing that's really important that we have to kind of look at is the fact that how can we start creating a bridge for that? Either a bridge of pairing up an animator with a technical artist and working together, to be able to, they can then lean on their skills the best. Or the fact that we start building better tools to make it easier for animators to get over into the game engines and actually make it more inviting for them. Because I mean, if you look at game engines, 5 or 6 years ago, it's not like you really want to jump in and learn some of the stuff that's in there. They've gotten better. They're now starting, I think, to make them a little more user friendly for people who aren't used to working in games. But whatever we can do to help bridge that gap and bring people over, I think is going to be helpful as we go forward.
I think it's super important for technical animators to actually understand animation, because not all of them are animators themselves, but those that are animators or have an animation background and decided to go the technical route, I think those are like the best unicorns, because not only can they solve problems, they can understand why that problem needs to be solved, and then they can help you implement it based on the animator's feedback.
Great. One more question. Emily, you might be able to jump in on this one here. Tuna21 asks, how do you feel about the industry outsourcing more and more cinematic animation instead of having it in-house? Does that affect how you put together teams or processes, or does it affect like your budgets or resourcing? Like, have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, I've definitely worked on both. And there's not really like a right or wrong in that formula or that equation. Really, I think it depends on, you know, if you have a big enough in-house team to support all your needs, great. That's not always the case, and there might be a lot more content than you can really staff or hire for. It's a lot easier to like be like, okay, I'm going to go to an outsourced studio and they already have a built-in team or like a whole pipeline that they can do to really ramp up very quickly versus like me going out and individually being like, okay, I now need to hire 30 to 40 more people
Right.
to create all the content that I need to make.
Do you feel that like in-house job listings for those roles kind of seem a little bit more rare these days?
A bit. I think that is a general trend, not necessarily just in games, but also in all areas of film and especially animation. There are a lot of more boutique studios popping up in different countries, and I think that actually allows for a lot of really interesting opportunities for small studios to grow and to be a part of the industry, or for different people to work with across countries in other areas. And like part of the pandemic, I think, helped support us to do that as well. And it's interesting to get those different opportunities and working with different studios that way.
Well, one more question. We have about a couple minutes left, and so one of the last questions that we had was the opportunities for cinematics in today's industry. Right? We talked a little bit about like the unicorns, technical animation, a little bit about outsourcing and what the role of cinematics in studios can look like currently or moving forward. But this conversation has led a little bit to like, what is the challenges of defining their role, like as a cinematic animator or an artist or somebody looking to get into cinematics in a game studio. So what do you guys see as the challenges, like people defining that role? Any thoughts on that? Or even their function in the gaming industry. We talked about why cinematics are important in the game industry, and I think more and more people want to make that jump in there. But when we talk about how technical something has to be sometimes, or we're finding those bridges, or the potential for outsourcing, like how do people start to focus in order to get in, as cinematic artists or animators?
I think defining that role depends on what studio you're at, because if you're at a small studio, you might be wearing a ton of hats. If you're at a larger studio, you might be very specialized and maybe not doing game integration and just focusing on just animating. So I don't know how you define that, but like I can only speak from my experience of how I entered in and how I started at very specialized and only polishing animation really, and then that grew into all of the other aspects that come along with cinematics and making them part of the game.
And do you think that like still specializing is still valid? Like you still want to see them specialize early on in their careers as an associate or a junior level?
I mean, if that's what they want to do, sure. Yeah. I mean, some people don't want to go the technical side because it's so you can get really good at being technical, and then it's all this work that you end up getting, right? And you're like, oh no, I want to polish animation. You're like, and then you don't have the opportunity to do that anymore. So it's like kind of depends on the person in the studio, I think.
One thing I think is important is to at least just be mindful of the doors open around you to learn something. So even though you want to focus on your animation craft, at least maybe take some time to learn how to integrate that into a game engine, or at least get your animation into a game engine, how it works. Just those little things are gonna make you more attractive, I think, to a studio, knowing that you have that kind of insight and know-how, than just feeling like you're going full on technical animator or full on tech artist type work. Just look at those opportunities where you can learn just a little more, just to kind of put that in your mental toolbox talks of things you can do. I think one thing I'd be mindful of is that, game engines are in reach of everyone now. They're free. Everyone can download them. You can download MetaHumans. You can download animation packs. You have all kinds of amazing content to make cinematics with, because it's interesting now. I think about the word cinematic being something tied to games, but so many times now people are putting out cinematics they made in Unreal Engine. That's awesome. That's amazing. People are doing this stuff at home, and they're calling them cinematics. They may not be in a game, but they're calling them, hey, I made this great cinematic, and they did. It's amazing. Being mindful of the fact that all this real-time technology you're getting to work with is great, and you're executing in real time or rendering an engine, but real time means something different in a game when you're doing cinematics. It means learning how to be efficient. It means learning how to get your content to run, within certain specifications of working in real time, versus, hey, I made this in real time on my computer. So I think that's something that we probably need to help teach people a little more of, is the understanding of what real time means when you get in the game business, versus a lot that's being put out there now saying, hey, we're doing this stuff in real time, or I can execute this in real time on a high-end PC. Okay, what happens when you go to having to do something on a device that basically all the technology was basically created in 2018. That's kind of where you're locked in, where that technology is at that point. So there are boundaries you have to work in to make that stuff work, that I feel like we could probably provide more insight to anyone getting into cinematics.
Yeah, I think it's also just about being open and just even considering cinematics as a pathway. Because for me, right before I was at Blizzard, I came from a stop motion animation studio, which in my mind, could not be further from what I thought I could actually do when it came to cinematics. And with the folks at GDC, you're right there. Just thinking about it as a possible pathway, and thinking about it as something that is an option. And there are a lot of things that we're all figuring out together, and that we haven't quite figured out yet. But to Greg's point, there's a lot of resources out there that are very accessible. And, if I can do one more plug, the SGC is just on Discord right now. We're still really very casual and open, and people are hopping in with questions of running into things in Unreal Engine 5 and they don't know how to get through it. And there's somebody who is throwing out some different opinions or solutions, and everyone's sort of helping each other out in those ways. And so being fearless and not afraid to approach this, even if you are coming into it new, or you're coming into it as a veteran from games or from another industry outside of cinematics, but being open to that.
Well, that's a great way to end it. I think we are at time. It's been an hour already, and such great discussion around cinematics and games. I want to thank all the panelists today coming from Society for Game Cinematics and taking time out of your days to share some knowledge with us. I continue the discussion on Discord. SGC has the Discord. You can continue that discussion on Anim State and the Animation Exchange. Thank you so much for joining the panel today. Anywhere that they can reach you guys online to continue more discussion. Anything you guys like to throw out where people can talk to you still more online?
Societyforgamecinematics.com has all the links to our LinkedIn page as well as our Discord. And right now, we are primarily engaging a lot on Discord. All the founders are on there, a lot of members on there at the moment. And then coming soon, as we are still in an early phase for SGC, but we are getting ready. So now is a good time to open up a survey and reach out to all the membership, because we have over 1,800 people on LinkedIn and about 800 or so on Discord, I think, and getting feedback from everyone on what do they want to see, where do they feel like they can contribute in the future, how do we grow as an organization, where do we want to go from here, and getting that information back from everyone is really going to help us, I think, carry forward into the future too.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate everything. This was an amazing hour for me as well, living in cinematic land and loving it, and just being a part of this discussion. And I can't wait to continue that, through SGC and online. So thanks again for all of your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
JP.
everybody. Thank you.
All right. See
Bye.
ya.